It's time for our scarf of the week, and this week we're making a really interesting knitted scarf that's got these cool wedges that are going in different directions. And this is done with an ombre yarn, which is fantastic for creating this beautiful graduated color effect without actually doing any color work with your yarn. It's just all one ball of yarn. And this has a really interesting construction, but it's actually very easy once you get the hang of it. We're going to start by knitting this first triangle here at the base, and then we're going to knit the second one and join it to the first one as we go. So first I'll show you how to start this first triangle. We're going to begin by casting on one stitch, which I think the best way to do that is just with a slip knot. So I'm just placing a slip knot onto my needle. And I'm going to knit into the front and back of this stitch. And to do that, we're going to begin as if it's just a regular knit stitch. It can be a little awkward when it's the very first stitch. I'm going to knit that, but instead of pulling that loop off of the left-hand needle the way we normally would, I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to take my right-hand needle, reach around, and go into the back of that same stitch. Knit that one, slip it off, and now I've got two stitches from the first one. I'm going to turn. I'm going to knit to the front and back of this first stitch. So again, I'm beginning to knit. I'm not pulling that loop off though. I'm just going to reach around and knit to the back of it. And now I'm going to knit to the end of the row. In this case, that's only one stitch, but I'm knitting to the end of the row. Then I'm going to turn. Again, knit to the front and the back of the first stitch, and then knit to the end of the row. And that's how this triangle is built. Every row is the same. Knit into the front of the back of the first stitch, then knit to the end of the row. And in that way, it will gradually increase and create a nice little triangle. So once this triangle is the size that it needs to be, according to the pattern, it's time to move on to build the next wedge. And I've got here a little triangle that's already complete. And the important thing to do here is you're going to place a stitch marker on the side that's facing you as you begin to knit. So here's my working yarn that I'm going to be knitting with, and with this side up, I'm placing a marker, and that will tell me that I will always do my increases on that side of the triangle. So to begin building this next wedge, we will start with knitting into the front and back of the stitch, as we've been doing. Then slip, slip, knit. That means I'm going to slip one stitch knitwise, slip the next stitch knitwise, then insert the left needle into the front of those two stitches and knit them. Now I'm going to turn and knit every stitch. And basically what the marker does for you here is that when you're on the side without the marker, all you do is knit. When you're on the side with the marker, that's when you do the fancy stuff. So now it's time for the next row. And see this gap? That's important. We're going to be working with that gap. It's it's almost like a stitch marker to tell us where we are in the pattern. So I'm beginning by knitting into the front and back of the stitch. Then I'm going to knit one. Now here I am at the gap. When I'm at the gap is when I do my slip, slip, knit. I want to slip the one before the gap and the one after the gap. And what that's doing is, first of all, closing up that hole, but second of all, it's actually joining to that first triangle as we go. Now I'm going to knit all the way back, and I would continue to do the same thing on every right side row, which is the row with the marker. You're always going to knit into the front and the back of the first stitch, then knit, and when you get to the gap, you do the slip, slip, knit. And then that way you're picking up a stitch as you go along each wedge and joining them together. The last quick thing to tell you is that when you complete this wedge, you're going to flip the work, you're going to move the marker to the other side of the work and continue in the same way as you built this wedge, and that will make the directional triangles be positioned in the proper position as you knit. So this is a fun one. It's kind of neat but not difficult. So I hope you get out some yarn and give it a try.